Bang. It's just gone 2 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon, a bit of a wet, miserable Melbourne Tuesday afternoon. Here with Emma Ferguson from Luna. Welcome. Thank you. Got a really interesting chat today. I've been looking forward to doing this one for a little while. Quite a few clients that we talk to and organisations we talk to are looking for different things and different ways to attract and retain talent and make themselves become more attractive as an employer. And this notion of equity or stock and that sort of thing comes up quite often. So I've been looking forward to having this discussion. The way we do things around here, though, is a very quick 1-minute intro. Just tell us who you are and what you do.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Simon. So, my name's Emma Ferguson, and I'm from Luna Startup Studios. So I'm a senior startup lawyer there. And what we do at Luna is we kind of live and breathe startups. We're a one-stop shop for startups. So we have 3 core arms. Firstly, the legal team that I'm in. And so we do everything from really early stage company setup, your first contract, all the way through to those really kind of complicated Series A, Series B, those big investments, and everything in between. So employee incentive schemes, securing IP, anything in the middle as well. Beautiful. The second one with Luna is the accounting team. So that's anything financial for startups, tax, bookkeeping, virtual CFO, that kind of stuff. And then our final arm is the programs arm, where we work with entrepreneurs and founders and really run training and workshops to skill them up in the kind of key skills to really succeed. And that's kind of like what we're doing here. We work with accelerators and universities and people in the industry to kind of add value and get some valuable content out to the community.
Beautiful. Thank you.
All right.
And I'm going to hazard a guess that at the moment you're probably quite busy with, because I'm guessing, tell me if I'm wrong, but I saw a tweet the other day from I think it was Andrew Bassett saying now is the best time to do a startup if you're going to do.
Yeah. It's crazy. We've been so busy, and it's kind of weird going through this pandemic period, and there's a lot of businesses really suffering. But we've been the busiest we've ever been, and lots of new people setting businesses up, lots of startups who are already going one direction, pivoting. So there's a lot of work and a lot of movement in the space, which is really exciting.
It is. It's brilliant. Great. So we're going to be talking about equity and stock and all these sorts of things that a lot of businesses try or want to use as part of the way that they pay and remunerate the staff. Let's be clear. What is stock and what isn't it?
Yeah, so equity, it's a really good question. It's kind of thrown around a lot, and I think a lot of people don't really understand what it means. So when we've got a business, you've got a company set up, you've got the board of directors, and they're kind of running the operations of the business, coming up with a strategy for how the business is going to be run. And then you've got your staff who kind of implement the strategy that the board decide. And the staff and the board are very separate from this concept of equity. And the equity is the ownership of the business. So commonly it's reflected as shares. So when people talk about shares, that's a form of equity. And so if there's 100 shares on issue in a company and you hold 50 of those shares, you own 50% of the company. And then if the company is sold down the track, Google buys them you get 50% of the profits on the sale of that business as well. So that's what shares are normally what we're talking about when we talk about equity. But there's also another one that's thrown around a bit, which is options. You might have heard of options, and they're basically a promise for shares in the future. So options will convert into shares at some point in the future, usually on the passing of a certain period of time, or if you hit a milestone, and then you'll have that ownership through shares.
Brilliant. Can I just hold you 1 sec? I'll edit this bit. I've just got someone at the door.
No worries.
Go. That was booze.
An essential delivery, that one.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you. I could hear him buzzing. I was like, oh no, this is not cool. Beautiful. So I said I'll just edit out this bit.
Right.
Cool. So what stage in a business's life? I don't know why I keep doing this. Which stage in a business life is it appropriate to start thinking about or using equity? Yeah.
So you can kind of issue equity to staff and employees and contractors. You can do that early on in the game, or you can do it a bit later once you've got a bit of momentum. And it's not so much a matter of when, but a matter of who you're issuing equity to and why, and what's the reasoning underpinning that. So whenever you issue equity to employees or contractors, you're giving away a stake of the company. So if you're the current only shareholder and you give away equity, you're diluting your own ownership in the business. So you've got to be prepared to do that. And in some cases, that's absolutely the right call. But it's not something that you should just be doing for, every Tom, Dick and Harry that comes along into your business. You want to make sure that they're a person who's really going to add value and you see in the long term for the business as well.
So when you're early stage and you're thinking about, maybe building your founding team, is that sort of where we think, all right, well, once we get to maybe this sort of run rate or whatever it is, that's when we'll start issuing maybe?
Yeah, definitely. And usually founders do have equity to start off with. The founding team will have, this might be split 3 ways between 3 founders. But then, there's often people who aren't founders but are quite integral to the business. It might be an advisor who's really, setting you up with key contacts in the industry and going to be there for the long term. And you might want to offer them a small stake, 1 or 2%. It doesn't have to be a huge amount. So that could be appropriate early on as well. But some people you want to test that relationship a bit more and, do a project with them and make sure that it's actually the right fit before you offer them some equity in the business.
Have you seen much data, or are you aware if there's any data around to prove that equity or options increases tenure or retention, that sort of thing?
Yeah, look, I haven't looked at the data, but just from the way that the startups that we work with, it's a great way to get your employees and contractors to have skin in the game and to get them to stay, because if they've got a stake in the company, they're incentivized to work harder because if the company succeeds and improves, then the value of their stake also increases. But also there's usually this concept of vesting that applies to equity when you're issuing it to employees and contractors. And that incentivizes them to stay for a longer period of time because they don't get the full rights to their equity until they meet that vesting period. And you can be quite flexible with what that vesting period looks like. For some people, it might just be 12 months. For others, it might be 4 years, 5 years. So, and you can have incremental vesting over that 5-year period. So that really does incentivize people to stay so they can get realize the full value of that equity.
So equity could be related to performance in a positive way. Hey, if you hit these things, we'll reward you with some stock. Are there instances of it going the other way as well? Like, can you take equity off people? Or?
Yeah, so the standard approach is to tie the vesting or equity to just time commitments. So if you stay for 1 year, a third of your equity will vest, or your options or your shares will vest, and then the final 2 years it'll just be incrementally by each quarter or month. That's the kind of the baseline way that you do it, but there you can be a little bit more nuanced with how you structure it, and you can have some KPIs there. If we hit this target, if we sell X amount and bring on X amount of new customers, then this portion of your equity will vest on that day. So you can have KPIs. You just want to be really clear when you're wording them. There's no ambiguity and room for a dispute later down the track.
Yeah, you should probably get a lawyer or someone to help you with it, shouldn't you?
Yeah, it won't hurt, for sure.
So what are the risks around giving equity away?
Yeah, there's a few things to keep in mind. So importantly, there's always going to be a distinction, and you guys probably deal with this a lot, between employees and contractors, and making sure you've got that distinction correct. So with employees, you've got to be really careful that you pay them their award rate salary in cash. You can't substitute equity in for that. You can obviously top them up with equity. So just being really careful of that with contractors. And if they are an actual contractor and not just an employee titled a contractor, then you can just pay them in equity. So a lot of advisors for startups might just not have any kind of monetary amount of salary. They just get 2% in the company over a period of time, and it's purely equity.
Yeah.
That's
Sorry. I was going to say, I think we've sort of all heard of horror stories of people trying to get partners on for sweat equity, I think is the phrase. Like the promise in the future that if we do all this stuff for free now, then you'll get some equity down the track. Not strictly legal, I don't think, to have people working for for nothing?
Yeah, so if they're employees, absolutely not legal. You need to be paying them a salary that's reflected in law, and that's a really important one. So employees, you definitely do need to pay salary and pay super and do all of the right things by law. With someone who's a contractor, you can just pay them equity. So it's someone who, it's usually like an advisor who might do one day a fortnight or one day a month, giving you advice, joining board meetings, giving you strategic advice. And that's completely fine if they're engaged as a contractor and not an employee.
Gotcha. Understood. Yeah. And I guess, from a risk perspective, when you've given out a certain part of the business, is there a risk of that affecting how attractive your business might be if you were looking to sell or to earn out, that sort of thing?
Yeah, really, really good point. So with giving equity away to staff and contractors, you want to make sure you're not giving away too much. So potential investors will look at your cap table and see how the equity is split between founders and employees. And really, you shouldn't have, 15% around about for employees is kind of standard and key contractors. But if you're having like 50% of the company held by employees, that's going to look really, really odd for investors. And it means that the founders are already diluted so much that when investors come in, they're going to be diluted even more. So really striking that balance and making sure when you are issuing options to employees that you're issuing them the right amount. And, typically would say, advisors and people like that get 1% to 2%. Employees, similar amounts. You shouldn't really be issuing them, large portions of your company.
Yeah. And can you only be giving away equity and options if you're listed, or?
No, you can be a private company. And yeah, we work with private companies, PTY Ltd, startups, and that you can completely issue options and shares as a private company.
Okay.
I think one of the main kind of considerations and to look out for is the kind of the tax implications of issuing equity to employees. And if you don't get it right, it can completely undercut the whole purpose of, incentivizing your employees. So one thing to think about is like early stages, if you're just issuing shares and there's not a lot of value in your company, it's kind of fine just to issue shares and have a reverse vesting schedule where they have to earn, hit certain time milestones in order to earn rights for the shares. But if you're doing that later in the piece, when there's value in the company, you can't just issue shares for no value, because there's actually, your company has assets, you might be turning over a bit of revenue. The ATO actually looks at that situation and says, well, you've issued someone shares for no value, but there was actually heaps of value in the business. We're going to tax that employee up front for the value of those shares, so that employee actually gets hit with a tax burden on the issue of those shares. So that can be quite problematic. And so to skirt around that issue, what we do is we set up what's called an employee share option plan, an ESOP, and we do it that's in a way that's in line with the ATO startup tax concessions, which are a special set of rules that allow those employees to get tax incentives, such as they're not taxed up front. They also get like CGT discounts when they dispose of their shares eventually, all these tax incentives so that startups can actually use issuing options and shares in a way that's not going to hit their employees with a big tax burden.
Gotcha. Cool. Without simplifying what you do, it probably, I'm going to guess it's one of those things that once you get to understand the nuance of it, it's possibly not as complicated as people probably think.
Yeah.
If a business is seriously wanting to sort of go down that route, what sort of time frame would they be looking at from, okay, we think this is a good idea, to, okay, we're rolling this out? Is it like a year? Is it 6 months?
For an ESOP, for an actual ESOP plan?
For an ESOP?
So, yeah, it doesn't take too long to set one up. You do it, by the time you engage lawyers and get through that process, probably a month or so, just to get the actual document set up and actually, offer your first participants, your first employees, some options under the plan. So it's something that can happen pretty quickly. Same for issuing shares. You can get that process rolling pretty quickly. The main things to sort out are making sure there's no real tax burdens for those participants, and then also making sure that vesting schedule is really appropriate for that each particular employee, because some people it's going to be a longer period, some people shorter. So making sure you're comfortable with how that vesting works.
Yeah, brilliant, fantastic. So I think that it's